He was a former Navy SEAL searching for a place where he could finally breathe. With his last $10, he laid claim to a forgotten cabin buried in the heart of winter. But as he arrived, the air itself felt wrong, heavy with unspoken dread. Shadow, his canine partner, uttered a single, low growl before falling silent. The gate creaked in the wind, and from the crossbeam above a young officer was hanging nearly lifeless, her body battered and frozen solid. Ethan came here for peace. He found a death trap, a dying woman, and a secret with the power to devour this whole town. Before this story unfolds, tell us where you're watching from. And if this journey moves you, please hit subscribe so you never miss another story of unbreakable loyalty and courage. Your support means everything to us. Winter crept over the Wyoming outskirts, a vast and silent white shroud, silencing everything but the hollow moan of wind clawing across desolate lots. The old 2008 Chevy Silverado trembled with every gust, its faded blue paint lost beneath a layer of frost. Inside the truck bed, Ethan Hale awoke with a sudden sharp gasp, his hand flying to his right shoulder. The nerve pain lanced down his arm like a live wire. His fingers trembled, betraying him with their weakness. They were ghosts of the IED blast in Raqqa that ended his life in the SEAL teams. At 35, Ethan carried the rugged frame of a man built for the long haul, tall, broad-shouldered, sculpted by deserts and broken cities. But his face held a silent, bone-deep exhaustion, dark stubble dusting a square jaw, his eyes a restless, stormy gray that never found peace, and the faint hollows beneath them, carved by countless sleepless nights. The war had left the Middle East, but it had never truly left him. Beside his boots, Shadow, the 7-year-old German shepherd who once charged into gunfire, whimpered in the grip of a nightmare. His paws twitched wildly, fleeing an explosion only he could see. His black and tan coat was dull and thin, a testament to his unending stress. With patches worn thin near his hips from the chronic agony of arthritis and hip dysplasia, even awake the dog clung to Ethan's side, his ears tracking ghosts no one else could hear. Ethan reached out with his one good hand and stroked the dog's head. "Easy now, boy," he murmured. Shadow's eyes opened a deep and frightened brown. He slowly relaxed at the touch, but a tremor still lingered in his chest. The war had scarred them both, each in their own unique way. A savage gust of wind slammed the truck, rattling its metal frame. Ethan pulled his tattered jacket closer against the cold. Crumpled veterinarian bills slid from the dash, fluttering onto the seat beside him. He made no move to gather them. He already knew the grim arithmetic. The VA disability check, $731 minus $86 in tax, barely paid for prescription food, anti-anxiety medication, pain relievers, and the cheapest spot he could find to park for the night. Most days his own meals were a distant afterthought. He unlocked his phone, scrolling more from habit than from any actual hope. Job offers demanding a physical strength he no longer had. Messages from security firms politely declining due to his medical limitations. Ads for things he couldn't possibly afford. Then a single link broke the pattern: tax foreclosure auction county listings. He clicked. Scrolling through the list, a single picture caught his breath. A cabin buried in snow, a fence surrendering to time, a bleak gray sky, and 0 bidders. Minimum bid $10. Ethan stared at the number. $10. It was less than the cost of Shadow's joint supplements. He exhaled a tired, broken laugh, escaping his lips. $10. Hell, he tapped. He placed the bid. No expectations, no plan, just a man desperate for the smallest sliver of shelter. Moments later, a chime. Bid successful. Shadow stirred at the sound, his tail thumping once, as if he somehow sensed the momentous change, a change neither of them could truly grasp. "Guess we're homeowners now," Ethan murmured, his voice hollow. They pushed through the darkness, the snow thickening into a white curtain that devoured the road. The Silverado rattled and groaned, every pothole sending a searing jolt through Ethan's wounded shoulder. Shadow, wedged beside him, whimpered with each jarring lurch of the truck, the biting cold seizing his old joints. Miles later, the forest finally broke, revealing the property. No lights, no sign of life, only a dark silhouette consumed by the towering pines. Its gate hung crooked as if violently forced open ages ago. Ethan killed the engine. Silence crashed down instantly. A silence too deep, too absolute. Not the peaceful quiet of a remote night, but the taut, fragile, quiet soldiers know all too well from ambush sites. Beside him, Shadow went rigid. His ears shot up, tail tucked low, every muscle coiled and tight. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered, his knuckles white on the flashlight. He swung out of the truck, snow crunching ominously under his boots. His breath plumed white in the frigid air as he neared the gate, raising the flashlight with his left hand, his only good hand. The beam of light crawled upward and froze. A pair of legs dangled in the air, their boots faintly dusted with fresh snow. Then the outline of the body, then the face, pale and cold, barely human under the shimmering frost. A woman hanging from the wooden arch by a thick, coarse rope. Ethan's own pulse thundered in his ears. Shadow let out a sharp bark, then a low whimper, pacing anxiously at his feet. He surged forward, wrapping his arms around the woman's waist, trying to take her weight. She was disturbingly light, frozen solid, her limbs like stone resisting him. Her hands had been cruelly bound behind her back, her wrists a swollen purple ruin. A thin line of dried blood traced a path down her fingers, frozen into brilliant crimson crystals. "Stay with me," Ethan pleaded into the wind, not knowing if she could even hear him. Her lips were blue, her breath just a fragile flicker, a faint mist there for an instant, then gone. He pulled out his pocket knife and frantically sliced through the rope. Her body crumpled into his arms, a dead weight. He grunted her mass, tearing at his ruined shoulder, igniting a starburst of pain behind his eyes. But he refused to let go, carrying her with a desperate gentleness. Shadow circled them both, whining pitifully, his whole body trembling not from the biting cold but from a terrible memory. He had seen too many soldiers fall this way, too many bodies pulled from the rubble. His instincts screamed danger. Ethan kicked in the cabin door. The hinges shrieked. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, a scent of old wood dust and something else beneath it, like secrets left too long in the darkness. He carefully laid the woman on the wooden floor. She looked to be in her late 20s, her shoulder-length chestnut hair matted with ice against her pale cheeks, her freckles nearly invisible under the frost, and features that might have once been soft, now etched and tight with agony. Her uniform shirt was shredded, the badge gone, her name tag half torn away. It read Donovan. She was a cop. Ethan shrugged off his jacket and gently draped it over her, lowering his face to hers, searching for any sign of breath. A faint warmth touched his cheek, a fragile thread, but it was there. Shadow moved beside her, pressing his own body gently against her, offering his warmth. The dog's ears were pinned back, his gaze fixed on her face, a silent plea for her to stay. Ethan settled beside them, his own heart still pounding. "How long were you out here?" he breathed. The wind raged outside. Within the cabin's walls, her faint breaths were the only proof of the life still clinging to her. He surveyed the ruin, shadows in every corner, shattered shelves, a cold hearth dust dancing in a sliver of moonlight. A home he'd purchased for $10 and the very threshold of a nightmare. Her chest hitched once, a fragile movement. Then again. Ethan leaned in his jaw, set his gaze sharp and intensely focused now. Not the tired gaze of a man worn down by the world. It was the focus of a warrior, his mission clear. He didn't know her name. He didn't know who was responsible. But he knew one truth. He had gotten here just in time. And whatever dark secret she carried, that secret was now his burden to bear. The cabin itself seemed to breathe a slow, ragged sound, like an ancient beast stirring from a long, troubled sleep. Ethan knelt beside her, working in the narrow beam cast by his flashlight. The wavering light revealed the dark bruises on her neck. The burns from the rope were etched into her skin like a vile signature, left by one who wanted her to suffer. Not quickly. Grace Donovan. He just didn't know her name, but he recognized the look of a soul the world had forgotten. Ethan shrugged off his jacket, carefully draping it over her shoulders. His left hand moved with practiced purpose, checking for her pulse, a fragile tremor beneath his fingertips. Her breathing was shallow and fragile. The cold had seeped deep into her very bones. He drew her closer to the dying fire, rubbing warmth into her arms with slow, controlled motions. His own fingers were stiff from the freezing air, but the hard-won discipline from the battlefield kept his hand steady. Now and then a sharp spasm of pain shot through his right arm, forcing him to grit his teeth. The nerve damage was relentless, but he simply refused to stop. Shadow huddled close to Grace's side, his heavy fur rising and falling with each ragged breath. The loyal dog's ears twitched with every howl of the wind, every groan of the old cabin. Fear and instinct tangled inside him. He knew the scent of suffering. He had lived in that world for years. When Grace finally stirred, it was a faint twitch of her fingers. Her lashes fluttered, revealing eyes glazed with cold and confusion. For an instant she recoiled, her breath catching in a gasp of panic. "Hey, it's okay, you're safe now," Ethan murmured, his voice calm and low like he was soothing a frightened animal. "You're inside. You're alive." Her eyes searched his face, the stubble on his jaw, the storm-gray eyes hardened by wars fought far from here, the faint scar tracing his left temple. She tried to speak, but her throat was too tight. "Water," she rasped. Ethan poured a capful from his canteen, lifting it to her lips. She took a shaky sip, each swallow scraping her throat like gravel. "I'm Ethan," he said softly. "Ethan Hale." She blinked, but there was no recognition. She was too disoriented, but the kindness in his voice eased her trembling. "Grace," she whispered. He leaned in close. "Grace, good. Can you tell me what happened?" She inhaled sharply, the memory cutting through the cold fog in her mind. Tears welled in her eyes, born not of weakness, but of fury and fear intertwined. I'm Deputy Grace Donovan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was on a trail a case that no one else dared to touch." She paused. Trembling beyond control, Ethan covered her with more fabric and waited patiently. Grace's swallow was heavy. "It started 3 years ago. My partner, Lucas Ward, he just disappeared. They gave up the search in a week. I never did." Her gaze darted to the doorway, as if ghosts might emerge from the dark. All he left behind was a notebook. His personal field notes. I found it stashed in his locker, stained with soil warped by the rain, like he wrote until the very day he vanished. Ethan listened without a word. It was clear she wasn't just sharing facts, she was reliving the nightmare. Her voice finally cracked. "He was close to something massive. And the sheriff, my own sheriff, he knew about it." The gravity of her words hung in the air, a phantom in the room with them. "I followed Lucas's notes," she breathed. "Every trail ended here, right at this cabin." Ethan felt the room close in. That $10 price tag now felt impossibly high. "I came tonight to finish his work, but they were waiting." Her voice began to tremble. Her shaking hand rose to her bruised neck. "They dragged me outside, tied me up, and hung me. A warning to stay quiet." Ethan's jaw set like stone, like his own injured shoulder pulled tight. A dormant instinct awakened with a cold rush of adrenaline under his skin. This wasn't the rage of the battlefield, but a fierce protective anger for all the innocent souls he'd seen left to suffer. Grace's breath hitched. "They never meant for me to live." For a moment, Ethan did not move. "Then why did they—" "I think they need to know who else I told," she whispered. "They have to make sure it all stays buried." An unexpected noise sliced through the heavy silence. A soft scratching, claws against brick. Shadow's head shot up, his ears alert. His eyes were fixed on the hearth. The dog crept forward, his body low, and his tail rigid. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered, his voice low. Shadow nudged his nose to one specific brick, its surface worn and faded from what looked like frequent touch. A low whine escaped him as he pawed at its edge. Grace's eyes grew wide, a memory piercing through her fear. Lucas, he mentioned the fireplace. She breathed. Said it was the one place he felt secure. Ethan aimed his flashlight's beam. The brick shadow was focused on... It wasn't perfectly flush with the others. Some combination of instinct and training told him this was deliberate. He reached forward, probing the edges with his fingertips. The stone moved ever so slightly. Grace gasped. That has to be it, Ethan. He hid it there. Shadow glanced back, his eyes willing them forward. For the first time all night, a flicker of hope ignited. Ethan steeled himself to dislodge the brick, but just before his hand made contact, he scanned the cabin's dark corners once more. His gut screamed that whatever Lucas concealed here is why Grace was left hanging outside. And it was the reason more trouble was on its way. Shadow's claws scratched a desperate rhythm against the soot. Darkened stone. The sound echoed eerily in the small space, like a faint knock from behind a wall that was never meant to be opened. Ethan knelt down, tracing the brick's seam with his fingers. It moved again, a definitive shift. A fine veil of gray dust drifted down. Good boy, he murmured, but his voice was heavy with a sense of dread. Using the flat of his knife, he worked the brick loose. The cold stone slid free, exposing a hollow space filled with old, compacted ash and cinders. Ethan reached into the recess, the cold stinging his skin, and pulled out a small, soot-covered metal cylinder. It clinked a soft, hollow sound that caught in Grace's throat. Ethan pried it open. Inside a USB drive, a micro SD card in a tiny plastic sheath, a worn pen, and several folded pieces of paper. Their edges were curled. The ink was bled and blurred the script undeniably written in a desperate rush. Grace's breath hitched. That's Lucas's handwriting, she breathed. Her voice fractured not with pain, but with the crushing certainty of recognition. Lucas Ward, the officer who had simply vanished 3 winters ago. A man solid as an oak with a warm laugh and sandy hair, always just a little too long for the regulations known for an integrity that never bent. Now only this script remained. Jagged words streaked across the water-stained pages. Ethan's jaw clenched as he scanned one coordinate's names, dates, and one brief sentence that froze him more than the bitter air. Asterisk. If I disappear, trust no one in uniform. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the air thick and suffocating. Without a word, Ethan slid the items into his jacket. He never hesitated. He moved to a corner where the cell signal was a faint, struggling pulse, holding his phone high until a single bar appeared. He typed a message to the one man he knew he could still trust, Mark Rohr. Mark, a former Navy intel officer now running federal investigations in Denver, was a lean, sharp-eyed man in his early 40s, his dark hair pulled back in a knot, a trimmed goatee framing a severe expression. His reputation was one of calm precision, a man with zero tolerance for corruption, a resolve forged after his own brother was lost to a poison peddled by a dirty deputy years before. Ethan sent the files. A minute bled into 2. Finally, a reply glowed on the screen. I'm coming. ETA 2 hours. No lights. Don't let anyone know you're in that cabin. Before Ethan could show, Grace Shadow went rigid, tail-dropping, low ears pinned back, every muscle in his body vibrating with tension. His breaths came out in silent, sharp puffs. Then the sound found them. A slow crunch, tires pressing into deep snow, voices low and male murmuring just outside. Grace's eyes went wide, fear etching itself onto her face. Oh, they came back, she whispered, her voice a thread. They have to make sure I'm gone. Ethan killed the flashlight instantly. Darkness consumed the room, leaving only slivers of moonlight piercing the walls. He pressed a single finger to his lips, then steered Grace away from the door, guiding her into the shadows behind an overturned dresser. Shadow placed himself between them and the door, a statue of pure, silent defiance. Footsteps crunched closer. 3 men, maybe 4. One voice, deep and gravelly, muttered, "Ropes are still there. If she broke free, she had help." Another replied, "Just search the cabin. The sheriff wants proof." Ethan's heart found its cadence, the old combat rhythm returning despite his ruined arm. He reached into his vest, his fingers closing around his folding knife and the small tactical light from his service days. His right arm shook uncontrollably, but the muscle memory of 100 battles held him steady. The door groaned open. A blast of cold swept in. A tall figure stepped through, broad in the shoulders, wrapped in a heavy brown coat. His beard was a patchy mess, his eyes hollow with a sleepless paranoia. A second man slipped in behind him, thinner, his face pale beneath a camouflage hood. Shadow let out a growl so low it was more a feeling than a sound. Then the world exploded. The slender man saw a flicker of movement, not grace, but the faint, fierce glint of Shadow's eyes. "Dog!" But Ethan was already moving. He erupted from the darkness, his good arm shooting out to seize the man's wrist with a vicious twist. The man shrieked as his weapon hit the floorboards. Ethan struck his knee from the side, sending the man crumpling. Fire shot down Ethan's injured arm, but he ignored it, ramming his elbow into the man's jaw. Grace, barely on her feet, summoned her remaining strength, flinging a piece of broken wood at the tall man. The wood splintered against his shoulder, creating the opening Ethan needed to engage. The large man threw a punch, but Ethan dodged aside, moving purely on instinct. He drove his shoulder hard into the man's core, using momentum over raw strength. They slammed through a table, shattering it. Shadow launched himself at the third intruder in the doorway, fangs exposed. The man screamed as the dog's jaws locked onto his arm, yanking him backward into the snow. Realizing their advantage was lost, the other men fled as quickly as they came, hauling their wounded comrade along with them. Their frantic footsteps vanished into the blizzard. A heavy pulsing silence returned. Grace collapsed against the old dresser, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Ethan caught her just before she fell, carefully lifting her onto his back. "We have to go," he breathed. Shadow limped, his hip aching from the leap, but pushed ahead, every sense on high alert. They slipped into the forest, swallowed by the raging storm. Snow clung to Ethan's hair, Shadow's coat, Grace's tattered clothes. Every step was agony for Ethan, but he moved onward for Grace. For Shadow, for the truth Lucas left behind. Minutes bled into what seemed like hours until a shape emerged. A slumped barley barn, its timber frame weathered gray by time, left to ruin long before they were born. It was a refuge, a hideout, a brief respite from the coming storm. The barn materialized from the blizzard like a skeleton of past harvests. Its wooden ribs were warped by age and the relentless winter. Ethan forced the warped door with his shoulder, helping Grace inside, as Shadow shook snow from his coat in rapid bursts, frenzied shivers. The air within smelled of dust, brittle hay, and something ancient like the ghost of grain from long ago. Ethan carefully set Grace down near a pile of broken crates. Her face was still ashen, but the bluish tinge was gone from her lips. Her brown hair, matted and nearly frozen, stuck to her face in thin wisps. Every move made the bruises on her neck darken. Shadow paced the barn, nose to the floor, searching each corner as if mapping threats in the timber. His gait was stiff from the fight, yet his ears were still razor sharp, turning at every creak. Ethan surveyed the barn's interior. A rusted tractor sagged like a great metal beast against the far wall. Bales of straw lay scattered half-rotted. A few old tools hung nearby, a sickle, a bent shovel, a rusted handsaw hung from nails in the rafters. It was not shelter, it was not safety, but it was distance from their hunters. Ethan breathed out slowly, falling into the familiar rhythm of preparation. "Grace, don't move. Give me a few minutes." She nodded, wincing with the small movement. "Just tell me what to do." Ethan lit one lantern, then hid its glow behind a toppled crate, so only slivers of light escaped the cracks. Shadows danced on the barn walls, softening the hard angles of his rugged face. A square jaw, faint shrapnel scars his stubble dark in the flickering gold. Pain flared through his right arm again, but he masked it. He gathered what the barn offered: an old coil of rope, a few tin cans, a handful of nails, splintered planks. With these he began forging a perimeter, tripwires that rattled cans, shards of metal poised atop loose boards set to clatter if touched. Grace watched, absorbing his every move. "You've built these before?" she asked softly. "Overseas. Different materials, but the same reason." Her expression softened, not from pity, but with a quiet understanding. After setting the alarms, Ethan knelt by her side. "Do you know how to shoot?" Grace nodded faintly. "But I'm better with a taser than a Glock." "That changes tonight." He showed her how to steady her breathing. "I inhale through your nose, hold it, then release slowly until your arms stop shaking." He guided her grip, their hands nearly touching. The lantern's glow made the bruises on her wrists look like dark bands of suffering. "You're doing just fine," he said, his voice calm, steadying her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. Shadow settled himself near the entrance, his body taut, eyes locked on the cracks where the wind whispered through. A sentinel born of battlefields and nightmares. The hours bled together like ink on damp paper. Outside, the storm intensified, piling snow high against the barn walls. The wind howled across the plains, at times sounding eerily like voices lost to the whiteout. And then Shadow went completely still. Not a growl, not a bark, only silence. A danger that sharpened into absolute stillness. Ethan snuffed the lantern out instantly. Darkness swallowed them. Grace's breath hitched. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent anchor. "They're on us," he whispered. "Blood in the snow. They won't quit." Footsteps drew near. 3, maybe 4 sets, crunching through the frost. One voice, gruff and impatient, hissed, "Spread out. The sheriff wants their bodies." Another man answered with a grumble, muffled by a thick scarf. "Should have dealt with the girl before." Grace flinched. Ethan tightened his grip on her shoulder, grounding her. The first intruder's silhouette passed by the slatted wall, a tall man carrying a long hunting rifle, wrapped in a bulky winter coat. His very posture screamed overconfidence, the kind that men have when they answer to corrupt bosses, not to their own conscience. A second figure followed, shorter and broader, with a noticeable limp in his left leg. Even from the shadows, Ethan could read his history, the stiffness, the careful angle of his gait. Someone who had been shot before and never forgot the lesson. The moment they pushed open the barn door, the alarms went off. A tin can rattled loudly. A loose board clattered to the floor. Shadow lunged his bark, an explosive, deep, thunderous roar. Unstoppable. The hunters cursed, caught in a wave of panic. Ethan moved through the darkness as if it were his second home. The tall man swung his rifle blindly toward the sound, but Grace, remembering Ethan's training, fired a single sharp shot. The bullet slammed into the lantern in the man's hand. Glass shattered. The darkness deepened. The second attacker stumbled backward, slipping on the loose straw. Ethan seized the opening, using a heavy wooden beam for leverage. He struck the man behind the ear with the butt of a heavy wrench he'd found earlier. The man crumpled to the ground, groaning and disoriented. Shadow charged a third silhouette by the door, snapping and driving him back until the man tripped and scrambled away through the snow, abandoning the fight entirely. Grace fired again, this time aiming for the flashlight in the first man's grip, shattering it. Total darkness consumed them. The intruders descended into chaos. One dragged his unconscious partner away. "Fall back! Fall back!" The shouts vanished, their retreat swallowed by the howling wind. Silence fell, broken by the ragged breaths of 3 survivors. Ethan knelt by a beam, clutching his wounded shoulder. Pain shot through him, but his eyes stayed focused, calculating. Grace dropped beside him, her breath trembling. That was just the first wave." Ethan nodded. "They'll regroup. Come back harder." Shadow lay near their feet, his chest heaving, but his eyes were clear and determined. Outside, new footprints already covered the old. Men like that don't quit after one failure. Dawn bled into the storm, a pale wound of gray across the frozen horizon. The barley barn sat huddled in the center of the vast white expanse, its wood planks trembling in the wind. Inside, Ethan pressed his shoulder to the wall, breathing slowly to dull the spreading ache in his damaged arm. Shadow lay crouched by the door, fur on end. His amber eyes were locked onto the endless snow outside. The gash on his flank, a mere graze, was a dark stripe on his coat, but he refused to abandon his post at the entrance. A soldier, even in his pain. Grace tightened her grip on the Glock that Ethan had given her. She'd wiped most of the blood from her face, revealing sharp cheekbones and skin pale from biting cold, not from fear. Her movements were still stiff. Her breath held a tremor, but her steady hazel eyes showed no signs of panic now, only resolve. An engine rumbled across the field, then another, and then 5 more came to life. Ethan widened a gap in the boards to peer outside. A line of police SUVs with county decals, and behind them 3 unmarked black trucks. The kind small towns see when something is to be buried, not solved. He knew the man leading them even before he stepped out of the truck. Sheriff Billy Creston, tall, broad, with a gut grown confident from years of unchecked authority. His graying mustache curled down over a permanent sneer. He carried himself like a man who'd built his entire authority on fear and never expected anyone would dare question it. His winter coat was thick with shearling trim, but beneath it Ethan could see the holster strapped too tight on his hip, and his hands shaking slightly, not from the cold, but from rage. Beside him stood 2 deputies Ethan hadn't seen before, both young, both with vacant eyes, the kind who'd traded their conscience for job security. Their uniforms were worn and mismatched, badges crooked and cheeks unshaven. One had a long scar slicing his lip. The other's knuckles were bruised as if from punching walls or people. Grace inhaled sharply. "Those 2, they weren't on the roster last week," her voice cracked. "He hired muscle." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Creston cupped his hands around his mouth. "Ethan?" His voice tore across the field like a saw. "You've got something that belongs to me." Shadow growled low. Grace's knees bent instinctively into a defensive stance. Ethan steadied his rifle with his left hand, the only one he could trust anymore, and whispered, "They will try to flush us out first. Stay low." The sheriff motioned, and his men fanned out across the empty field. Guns drawn, their movements rehearsed. This was not a rescue mission. This was an execution. The barn shuddered as the first bullet hit its side. Grace gasped and ducked. Shadow barked, absolutely furious. Surging forward as if his own body could stop every bullet, Ethan yanked her shoulder, pulling her low. "Stay behind the tractor," he commanded. "The metal's thin, but it beats wood." Bullets hammered the walls, making splinters rain down like a vicious hailstorm. Icy snow blasted through the new openings, stinging their exposed skin. Ethan returned fire, with short, controlled bursts. He wasn't aiming to kill, only to suppress, but their position was being overrun. A round tore across Ethan's thigh, a searing line of white-hot fire. His leg gave out, but he ground his teeth and willed himself upright. Grace clutched his arm. "You're hit." "I'm still in the fight." Another rifle cracked. Shadow cried out a sound that sliced through the barn and shattered something deep within Ethan's chest. The loyal dog staggered back, fur split open where a bullet had grazed his flank. "Shadow!" Grace reached out, her voice breaking, but Shadow would not fall. He planted himself before them again, trembling with pain, but snarling at the door as heavy boots pounded closer. The barn door crashed inward. A deputy charged through, rifle raised. Grace fired a split second sooner. Her round struck the man's shoulder, spinning him around. Ethan pulled her aside as another deputy dove for cover behind a bale of hay, firing blindly into the dark. The 3 of them, a wounded SEAL, a battered officer, and their injured, faithful dog. They held their ground in the collapsing barn. Outside, Creststone bellowed, "End this, burn the whole damn place down if you have to." But then headlights ignited the field, flashing blue, red, and white. 3 SUVs roared over the snowy ridge, plowing toward the sheriff's men. Sirens wailed, swallowing the wind's howl. The sound of powerful federal engines was unmistakable. Mark Rohr's voice thundered from a bullhorn. "Federal agents, drop your weapons now!" Pure chaos broke loose. Deputies scattered like frightened crows. Creststone shoved 2 of his own men aside, bolting for the tree line with the frantic speed of a man running from the truth his entire life. Federal agents tackled 2 corrupt deputies into the snow. Another deputy threw down his weapon and collapsed to his knees. Ambulance doors were thrown wide open, medics sprinting toward the barn. The siege was over in seconds. The blizzard, however, was not. The world went quiet, save for Ethan's ragged breathing and Grace's soft sob of relief as medics reached them. Shadow pressed his head to Ethan's leg, his tail giving the faintest wag. They'd survived. But deep in the dark skeleton of the forest, Sheriff Billy Creststone was still running, and winter had not yet collected its final toll. Winter finally loosened its icy grip on the valley on one still morning, the kind where the snow no longer seemed a threat, but a fading memory softening in the pale sunlight. The barley barn, once their battlefield, now stood silent, marked only by the imprints in the straw where Ethan, Grace, and Shadow had held on through the longest night imaginable. Justice once unleashed in a small town often moves with incredible speed, and this truth was not a whisper. It was an irrefutable roar. The evidence Ethan had rescued from the flames and sent to Mark Rohr swept through the federal task force like a wildfire. Forged reports, secret ledgers, GPS logs, all of them branded with Sheriff Creststone's name. Within a matter of days, state investigators and federal agents descended upon the town's small brick courthouse and the sheriff's office with grim faces and no-nonsense voices, pulling files from drawers that had been sealed for far too long. The town of Elk Ridge watched the reckoning unfold in stunned silence. Then the silence shattered. For the first time in 3 years, the name Lucas Ward, a deputy with kind eyes and sandy-colored hair, a quiet laugh, and a reputation for mending the fences of elderly farmers, was at last spoken without a shadow of suspicion. His face, once a ghost on faded, missing posters, now gazed from framed photographs tenderly placed at the base of his grave. Residents left flowers, old sheriff badges, and small folded notes. A man forgotten, now a man finally understood. A man who had given his life trying to save them all. Grace Donovan stood before the stone wearing her new badge, its silver catching the morning sun as she wished he were there to see it. She was still bruised, her soul still healing, but touching the cold marble, her voice held steady, no longer trembling. The cabin was returned to Ethan the day after the investigation closed. It looked less cursed now, though. Still battered, the roof half-caved in the old porch, leaning, its walls splintered from the gunfire. But someone saw hope in the ruins. Someone believed it could be something more, and that someone was Grace. "Ethan," she set her breath a soft cloud in the winter air. "This place doesn't have to stay a wound. It can be something more for you, for Shadow, for others like you." Her hazel eyes held a gentle strength that didn't ask for anything, only offered hope. Ethan gazed at the cabin, at its sagging beams and the dark bullet holes, at the chimney stained by long years of silence. Shadow nudged his leg as if urging him toward hope, and so he said yes. So they began to rebuild. Ethan drove the first nails with his left hand, awkward and clumsy, but resolute. His right arm still shook from nerve damage, but Grace stood beside him holding the nails steady, smiling when a blow went crooked. Color was returning to her cheeks. The frostbite marks on her knuckles were starting to fade away. Shadow rested on a fresh bed of straw, sleeping on his side, his chest rising and falling softly. His paws twitched now and then, as if chasing something in a dream. Grace would pause her work with the hammer to kneel beside him, softly running her fingers through his thick, dark fur. "We're okay," she would whisper a soft refrain each time he flinched at a dropped tool or the roll of distant thunder. The 3 of them worked slowly, tenderly transforming the cabin and all the small moments within it. Those were the moments that truly stitched their new life together. One afternoon, Grace helped Shadow walk the field after a brief winter rain. The dog hesitated, the smell of wet earth and metal in the air sense tied to old explosions and memories he could not quite name. She crouched down in front of him, her soft brown hair falling in loose waves as she gently held his noble face. "It's just rain, my sweet boy," she murmured. "Nothing else?" Shadow pressed his forehead to hers. A small victory, a quiet healing. Another day, Ethan showed Grace how to build a fire in wet snow. She laughed as her very first attempt just fizzled out, then beamed with absolute pride when her second one sparked to life. "You're a great teacher," she said. "Don't tell my old instructors," Ethan replied with the ghost of a smile. "They'd probably die from the shock." Their laughter mixed with the sound of cracking wood, warm and beautifully simple. Their first shared meal inside the restored cabin was only simple stew and bread. Shadow curled beside Ethan, his head resting on his boots. Grace just watched the two of them, her own eyes softening. "Feels like a home," she said quietly. Ethan swallowed his voice low and thick. "Yeah, maybe it does." By the cabin window, Grace hung a framed photograph of Lucas Ward, as Ethan stood beside her, a pillar of silent support, offering a steadfast presence beyond words. Lucas's eyes, caught in a forever smile, filled the room not as a ghost, but as a warm, lingering light, the kind of spirit that watches over not one that haunts. Grace whispered, "We finished it, Lucas. We finished everything you started." Ethan laid a gentle hand on her back, while Shadow kept watch at her feet. 3 survivors holding sacred space for the one they couldn't save. The final piece was the wooden sign. Grace sanded its surface to a perfect smoothness, while Ethan slowly carved each letter. Shadow stood his faithful guard over what they called Lucas's promise. As they hammered it to the gatepost, the wind carried the sound softly across the fields, as if the valley itself was offering its blessing. On the day the cabin reopened, it was no longer a place to hide, but a true sanctuary for veterans. A new sheriff arrived that day, a man named Marlon Hayes. He was a tall black man in his late 40s, with close-cropped hair, unwavering eyes, and a voice that resonated with calm authority. Years ago, he'd served as a Marine MP, his posture still straight as a ramrod, his handshake both firm and honest. He met Ethan at the gate, offering a hand with genuine sincerity. "You did more for this town than you'll ever know," he said. Ethan returned the firm handshake. Hayes leaned in his voice low. "But Creststone's still in the wind. We'll find him. Until then, you keep your eyes open." Grace moved to Ethan's side, and Shadow pushed between them, his tail making a slow, steady sweep. 3 figures. A portrait framed by winter sun and snow. No longer running, no longer hiding, just standing. United. For the first time in so long, they finally felt like they belonged. You see, sometimes the miracles we pray for don't arrive announced by thunder and lightning. They come quietly carried by shattered people who find the courage to rise again. Ethan, Grace, and Shadow were 3 souls wounded by a world that should have kept them safe. And yet on one frozen night, a higher power brought them to the same place at the same moment to be each other's salvation. And maybe that is the truest miracle of all, that even in a world so often consumed by shadows, He still sends us the right souls at the right time, not to erase the pain, but to help us carry it until we can walk on our own. If you're watching this right now, hold on to this truth even on the days you feel lost, utterly alone, or completely unseen. A greater plan is still unfolding. Your story is still being written. Grace, hope, and help are being laid upon your path even now. Sometimes it looks like a friend, sometimes a stranger, and sometimes it's the unwavering loyalty of a companion who refuses to let you go. So if this story resonated deep in your heart, please share it with someone who is searching for hope tonight. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And if you'd like more stories of incredible courage, redemption, and life's quiet miracles, please subscribe and become part of our family here. May you be truly blessed. May your home be protected. your heart be healed, and your path be guided through whatever storms you face. And may angels walk with you just as they walked with Ethan, with grace and with shadow through that long and punishing winter.